Vigilante stalking and the covert use of advanced electronic weapons on vigilante stalking targets is basically the use of lies, again lies, to motivate networked groups of citizens to destroy the lives of their innocent targets. These programs are about the ongoing efforts to expose this activity and hopefully to stop it. There are literally thousands of websites providing information about these crimes.
Most of my harassment has been gangstalking. Harassment things, tools that are used. And sleep deprivation is one, isolation is another one, and sometimes even pushing people into poverty by not allowing them to work is another one. These are very basic. One of the goals is to make the targeted individual feel like they're the only one in the whole world and they're probably mentally ill and they need to be on psychoactive drugs that can destroy their brain cells or have other horrible effects that are irreversible. And the thing they need to learn is probably there's a good chance that they have a gang on them. And it's not one gang. It depends on where they go as to which gang it is. And so it's a sad fact that as the economy just kind of disintegrates, people can make money doing gang stalking and supplement their income. And that's what's happening. It's spreading.
Yes, and I think you have had reports from people who called you that there have been cases where perps are prevented from finding work just so they can be forced into doing crime against others.
Well, yes, I did observe that in one very nice person that I thought would never turn into a perp, but after having the job opportunities jerked away from them repeatedly and having financial obligations to take care of, they finally gave up. And later on, after they were trained in, about 6 months or a year later, I was just sort of musing out loud, saying, why would, they knew what was going on, and so I said, this is really the dirty thing to do to somebody. Why would anybody do this to somebody? So hopeless. It's so hopeless. If you don't have a job, you're going to be homeless. Then you're going to look incompetent and lazy. So they use this against people to pressure them into becoming perps. And another thing that I have heard over through the hotline is that they threaten to do things to their children if they don't join in. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get to just about anybody in the world. People have their limits, and especially in the society that we've set up here, it requires so much money to live, to keep a roof over your head and in a decent place and all of that, that you have to keep this income going all the time. And if there's a break in it, it doesn't take very long that you're looking at being in the street. And it seems to be specifically designed that way.
And they take full advantage, don't they?
Oh, they take full advantage to pressure people. And in fact, it looks like they're just trying to line up two sides here, perps and targets, and so that if you're not with them, you're against them. If you're not a perp, you're going to be a target. And this is the kind of very destructive to society type of thing, and to the family. They turn family members against each other. I think they're also can use mind control to bust up marriages, and it has nothing to do with feminism. It has to do with what they do with their brains. It's a mind control that they can use. The technology is something that only these people have. We don't know that we have there are technologies out there that are far beyond what we know, and that are not known to most people unless they're specially trained in this.
Yes, indeed. And Alan Watt was mentioning that in secret societies, college professor level is considered the lowest level of knowledge. And So the average college professor will laugh at you if you tell them this stuff is happening, even though it is the truth. I've heard from several people over my years being in activism that they find that when they approach their partner, they suddenly find that their partner instantly becomes repulsive to them. And that, the way they describe it, is it's a form of mind control. It's just like being hypnotized and commanded that the person standing there is repulsive.
Well, I think that's one of the methods they use, definitely. And also, I do believe that our society moving as fast as it is and requiring that everybody work 2 jobs to pay the mortgage and everything is another factor there that the deck is stacked against the family that way too. Sometimes they just cause the passion to go out of the marriage. One or the other partner will, usually the male, simply isn't interested anymore, and then here comes a floozy, and all of a sudden he's interested again. He thinks he's alive again, you know, and has fallen out of love with his wife and all of that. So they use every trick. If one trick doesn't work, they just go to another. They don't change what people do, they change when they do it. That is how they work it. That's how they can influence. There's a lot of influence that can be happening. You know, you can't take a normal person and make them want to stab somebody very easily. But you can take a normal person and they normally call certain people. You can change when they call them to disrupt their day. And nobody knows the difference. Very, very seldom do they ever know the difference. In fact, the telephone is the most effective isolation tool that the perpetrators have, in that they can control when people call, and they can reroute the phone calls if they want to. If you have calls coming in to your answering machine and you're not getting the messages, and you're not going to call those people back, and they're going to think that you don't want to talk to them. This is a good isolation tool. And again, even if you don't have an answering machine, if you have caller ID, you're getting calls and you don't return them because you don't see those numbers on there, because they're selectively erased, because the perps are the best telephone hackers in the world. And so you don't return those folks' calls, and they just think, well, I've called and called and called, and she just doesn't want to talk to me. And so that isolates you. That's one of their best tools of isolation for the perps, is the telephone. And we normally think of the telephone as being something to keep us connected with people, but they can turn it around, and they can make it where it isolates you. And that is how they do it, by making people call at the wrong time and by selectively erasing your messages and your caller ID numbers popping up.
So you would suggest then that a target always call back regardless whether they're expecting a message or not, just to be sure that one wasn't missed?
Well, I think the target should touch base with everybody they know every once in a while, because if they can erase the caller ID number off your caller ID pad, you're not even going to know these people called you. And they may be calling, trying to get you to go somewhere with them, or trying to inform you of something. I also recommend that do away with answering machine, do away with call notes. Don't have any of them, because all they are is an isolation tool. The perps will selectively erase certain messages so that you are isolated from your best supporters. It's what we are hearing from people.
And I've heard that they can even go a little further, and they can actually imitate somebody and pretend to be somebody they're not. Now, that doesn't apply to people close to the target, like their family members, but certainly a business call or something like that, they often jump in and intercept a call and pretend to be a business and say, yes, well, we'll send your order out tomorrow. In fact, the business never got the order.
That's true. We're having reports of that, as well as some people have reported that some calls they got were imitated. The voices were imitated, and they called the person and said, you called me and you said this, and the person absolutely denies it, and probably The perps have figured out how to imitate so many people's voices. It's causing total chaos in the communication over the telephone, and it messes up, it messes up a whole lot of things, messes up everything.
And your experiences with email are even worse, aren't they?
Well, email, and this is not just my email, it's a lot of activists report that some of the time-sensitive email arrives after the date that they could respond. And it's usually related to activism or something, and targets have this a lot. And it also happens with their snail mail as well. It's communications. Again, isolating the person by simply interfering with communication.
Indeed.
The perps change the mix every once in a while, and why, we don't know. We have no clue as to why they change the things that they do. However, there have been a lot of reports from people over the hotline that they wake up at the same time every night. They look over at the alarm clock and it's 11:11, or it's exactly 3:41 or something. It might have a meaning to them or something. We don't know why they do it or what happens, but that is one of the symptoms. And these are so subtle that people don't even recognize it as targeting.
Another thing, Sueann, that you mentioned on your site is what we call it is synchronized activity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's basically what you just described. There are callers who say that when they do get up in the middle of the night, there is a car passing by. They're normally dead-end streets sometimes. We just know that they want to synchronize things with the target, because when a target talks about that kind of a thing, they sound like paranoid schizophrenics. So this is all designed to make them look mentally ill when they're not.
Yes, I'd have to say that in my case and a few others, I've had skits put on where for maybe a few weeks, one particular guy in an apartment near mine would actually step outside his door and turn his key in the lock at exactly the same time I did that while on the way to work. And I wasn't that regular either, because when these things happen, I've always lived very close to where I work and often go in early. So I was doing this at random times, and it was exactly the same on, say, 3 days a week for maybe 6 weeks, and it was a mind-blowing incident. These guys would get to the elevator exactly the same time I did, and the only way I got around it was simply to use the stairs, because it got to be kind of a mind game after a while.
This is how they do these things, to make the targeted individual look nuts. And it's not that easy to do it, because here again, they step out of the paradigm. They step out of what people normally believe. People believe that the only time somebody would come into your house is to steal something of value, like your TV or your VCR. If they come in and they move something around and the TV and VCR are left behind, lo and behold, you must be a mental case. Couldn't be anybody to go to that much trouble to do that. Why would anybody do that? You're not important. You've never worked on a secret government case of any kind. You've never done anything to anybody, so therefore, it means you're a mental case.
Yes,
it's phenomenal.
Yes, it is. It means that you're not important enough to have this be happening to you, and listeners, that's how they're getting away with it. They know that you don't consider little nobodies important enough to have this happen to them, so they can do it with impunity. And you will never believe us normally until you visit our sites, talk to us, listen to this show and others. But this is the truth.
Actually, folks have absolutely no way to believe it until it starts happening to them. Then that gets their attention. If they think it might be happening to them, they'll start listening pretty quick and pretty hard.
Indeed.
So that's just it. It's very difficult it doesn't fit the paradigm. It doesn't fit what we know of crooks. But that needs to change.
Yes, Sueann, there's some interesting information on your site here for testing to see if you're being targeted, and you quote some interesting cases. Here's one, quoting from your site. It says, "Be aware of your conversation in your home. While working on a project, did you say, 'I need number 10 3/4-inch flathead screws'? And then you arrive at the store to find all the screw bins full except the number 10 3/4-inch flathead screw bin, which was completely empty."
Well, that's true, and that has come over the hotline from several reports. It's not just the screws in the screw bin. It could be the orange Gatorade. You know, it's obvious the shelves were just stocked up. You said, "Hey, we're out of orange Gatorade. You got to go get some." Put that on the list. You get there, and every kind of Gatorade in the world is on the shelf, and there's a big empty space where the orange Gatorade is or was. I get a lot of reports of that, or the shampoo that say, "Oh, I got to get my shampoo or the soap or whatever it is." It seems like they're just suddenly out of stock, and everything else is stocked up to the ceiling. And so there's a lot of reports of that kind of a thing. So if you've said that out loud in your home, and you don't need a bug finder to know that, hey, your house is bugged or something. Somehow they're hearing it.
Yes, indeed, and I can report, too, that I've been a target for 25 years, and being in engineering, I often inherited the job of going to the hardware store for various companies I worked with, and it would happen to me so many times I can't count them, probably 1,000 times in my 25 years of being a target. I would, in many cases, I wouldn't even say it to anyone. I'd simply measure up a job, decide what's wanted, just write out a list, and when I got to the hardware store, just those items on my list were all out.
Well,
this, listeners, is how petty these mind games get.
Actually, it had a purpose. They were trying to get us to fight with each other, to have our space crowded by each other like they crowd people's spaces in the grocery stores. They're continually stepping into the target space in the grocery stores.
Isn't that true? You mentioned that many times you have to use your cart to block the aisle.
I used to have to do that.
Because...
But then when I started wearing the T-shirt and the flyers, and they didn't want anybody stepping in my space. They didn't want anybody around me. You know,
right.
It's just different.
But I just wanted to let the listeners know that Sueann reported that these guys would squeeze past her if she...
Making contact.
Yes. Yes.
Until I started thinking real hard, like, I'm going to slap the fire out of them and call them a masher. You know, and then that's a stop too.
Yes.
They count on people not defending themselves. They want people who will be a willing victim, who will get comfortable with their level of torture. And if you're not going to do that, they can find others who will. There's plenty out there, plenty of them. Don't want to make waves, you know. So.
I know very well. Let's see.
It's difficult. If you recall, years ago there was an experiment done with rats, in which they crowded them all together, and then after a while they all went berserk, started, killing each other and trampling all over each other. It's basically the same thing, but most of the time they don't have to even touch you. If they even come within a certain circumference of you, they are intruding into your space, and it's not normal. People don't normally do this. They can normally wait till you move on down the aisle to get what they want. And if they're standing there getting in your space and they can't wait 2 seconds for you to move on down the aisle, they're a perp. And there are ways of, if they're going to do that, well, then you can be scouting the place for other victims. Just to see who else they're doing it to. Wear your T-shirt. Bring your flyers, and be watching other people. What are they doing to other people? They're doing this to somebody else. They're not just doing it to you. We don't know what goes through their mind,
We certainly don't, because it's very difficult to understand someone who's extremely mentally ill, and clearly these perpetrators are. They don't have a life, is one way to say it. They're consumed with harassing specific people and making them as miserable as they can, and doing it in such a way that their attacks are misinterpreted by everybody else as natural problems or mental illness.
They want folks who are observing the target to think that there is a psychotic process going on there, when actually if these bums would just leave them alone, they'd be all right. And unfortunately, what I have observed is that depending upon how long these folks have been tortured, some of them are pushed over the edge into at least a delusional belief. They'll believe that everything's contaminated with something and they can't find any good food or something like that. But try sleep deprivation for 20 or 30 years and continual torment and people harassing and following and preventing you from working. See what that'll do to your brain. Just try it sometime, Imagine what it would be like if you were followed around for 20 or 30 years and harassed and people making noises continually so you couldn't sleep or depriving you of sleep in some other way. The brain starts to build a defense, and it's through no fault of the individual. And however much, whatever happens to the individual is very an individual thing. But unfortunately, some of these folks do have some delusions because they've been tortured for years and years and years and years and years. And it's unfair to point at them and try to tell them they need to be locked up and all that. That's baloney. They need to be left alone. That's all that needs to happen. Obviously, if you've been prevented from working for years and years, your health is going to suffer, both physical and mental. There's no way about it. There's no two ways about it. There's no way around that. And this is probably the most evil, insidious thing on this earth that can happen to a person. It's the darkest place on earth a person can go. And it's hard to cope. They make it more difficult because they isolate the person from anyone who would help them.
And the tragedy is felt even more by the target because all of this is out in the daylight, in the open, and nobody will believe the target.
All in plain sight, and they get away with it. They get away with murder, essentially. They're actually stealing that person's life a little bit more every day. And that should be a crime that they could be locked up for life for, because they can't be trusted to behave normally towards people. What do you do with folks like that? You have to lock them up.
Yes, indeed. It's sad to say a very, very small number, less than you can count on one hand, of our members do seem to be troubled after years of this torment by artificially caused mental illness, and it's just a brutal crime to force someone into mental illness.
Well, it usually, what I'm seeing is that they're still functional. It usually takes the form of specific delusions so that they can still function. But it's amazing when you hear their story, how they're still sane. It is a tragedy, and it just makes you want to cry for them,
Yes, listeners, we could use your prayers, by the way. That would be very helpful.
Yes, because this is a spiritual battle. This is evil. There is nothing more evil than tracking somebody. I mean, they're like a pack of wolves. They get this person that they want to track and target and torture forever, for the rest of their lives, and they cut them out from the herd just like a pack of wolves. They isolate them from their family, from their friends, from anybody that can help them, and then they just tear at them. For the rest of their lives, they're torn apart by these people. And that's wrong.
That's right.
Let it happen.
Everything they attempt to do is messed with or blocked. Even tiny little things. Even little things that they might enjoy, like, well, in my case, I enjoy hanging out with and feeding squirrels. I will have perpetrators with dogs walk up, let their dogs off the leash, and actually encourage the dogs to chase the squirrels away. Yeah. This is what happens to every tiny little thing you like to do when you're being targeted this way.
So see how susceptible you are, because you don't have somebody with you to witness this with a camera or something like that. And that's another reason why they have a field day and why they're so desperate to isolate targeted individuals, because it makes their job so much easier. So one of the main things we need to do is find other targeted individuals and refuse to be isolated. Start hanging out together that it's being done to them.
Right, and equally important is people who should be supporting the target refuse to believe that it's artificial. They think there's something wrong with the target.
Well, you really have to be targeted to understand what this really is and to believe it. And until I went through some of this, I thought those, that people who complained of such were probably having a few mental problems and needed to slow down in their life and relax more or something like that. I didn't believe that this could actually be going on. But now I've experienced enough of it to know that these folks are telling the truth.
Indeed, and we all know what it's like to be told to see a psychiatrist. It's not fun when you know this stuff is really happening and it's not natural at all. And you're big about carrying cameras too.
I think cameras are very important, but I've always had one just because I like photography. I love photography. It's a hobby that you can have the rest of your life. It's also a very handy tool for all kinds of things.
Carrying that camera does reduce the amount of perpetrator harassment. It definitely does. There's no question about it.
Well, that's what we're hearing from Target. Cameras do change behavior somewhat. And so there's a lot of Targets now that are starting to carry their camera with them. We do have a T-shirt for sale that is good to wear to marches and rallies and even to the grocery store or the post office.
It certainly does, and you have a page of the T-shirt and some flyers, actually, which are sold through your website.
Well, the T-shirts are sold. The flyers can be downloaded for free.
Right.
So, and it's on stopcovertwar.com/T. That's TEE.html.
Yes.
If you go there, then there'll be some things there, tools for people who would like to be activists in this cause.
And I can tell you, I have one of Sueann's T-shirts, and it works great, particularly when you're stuck in line somewhere, as at the post office or the grocery store or a convenience store, because the emblem and text is on both front and back. And in warm weather, you can't beat it for informing people. And the perpetrators do not particularly like us to inform the public, so it's a good way to ensure that when the perpetrators place a lot of people ahead of us in line, maybe we'll give them second thoughts about doing that next time.
Well, it's just an opportunity to advertise the cause when you're standing in those long lines. And nothing probably concerns them very much except the possibility of targeted individuals finding each other and getting together and being a witness for each other, or working as an activist plan to bring out what's happening, because there are a lot of them, but the trick is, how do you find them? You don't have money to put advertisements in magazines or newspapers, so the only way a person of limited means has is through flyers and T-shirts.
Yes, and I'd like to report an interesting something I've observed. I've had an activism sign on the back of my backpack, which I wear everywhere, for a couple of months now. And I used to be stuck in long lines in the supermarket. I'm not anymore. I never get stuck in a long line. And I don't get the mobbing of the supermarket or convenience store that used to happen. And clearly, they don't want anybody reading the sign. And it's just amazing how well it's worked, and the inspiration came from you, Sueann.
Well, that's A few others have reported the same thing.
So any targets who are maybe listening to this show may want to seriously have a look at Sueann's website and think about wearing her t-shirt. Again, it's stopcovertwar.com/TEE. That's Tango Echo Echo .html.
Right, and they can also post a contact information on another page if they so desire. What really makes this style of stalking ineffective is publicity. All of a sudden, it's not as effective, and it makes the perp's job harder, more difficult if it starts to become known what's happening. It's spreading. Targeted individuals are finding each other and getting together and being a witness for each other, working an activist plan to bring out what's happening, because there are a lot of them. And be watching other people. What are they doing to other people? They're doing this to somebody else. They're not just doing it to you. There are millions of victims, and that needs to change.
Not all perps understand what they're into.
That's right. They're lied to.
All the time.
They're told lies about the target. They think they're doing a good thing. They're getting rid of people. They're sending them a message that they need to change their ways and clean up their act. This is all a big fat lie that they're told to get them to be motivated to do this crap.
Yes, ordinary people just would not take this on as a living if they knew the truth about us. And I discovered a very few perpetrators who eventually figured out that I wasn't whatever I was being labeled as, and they turned around and became friendly.
It's apparent that this type of harassment and stalking is a lot less effective if it's not kept a secret, because the way it's done is designed to make the targeted individual look mentally ill, and if it starts to become common knowledge that there's these gangs of thugs running around doing this kind of thing, then it's not very effective anymore as a weapon of terrorism.